On the sport rorts saga now plaguing the Morrison government and particularly the Cabinet Minister Bridget McKenzie. Sky News can reveal the Chief Executive of Sport Australia, the organisation which administered the grants, is to depart her job in the coming days after raising concerns internally about the program. Let's bring in Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, talk us through the timeline here. I know you've spoken to the individual concerned, the outgoing Chief of Sport Australia. How did this transpire?
Well, Kate Palmer is the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Sports Commission until the end of the week. In October, the government announced her contract was not being renewed, and she said she's leaving of her own accord to me. She's denying her departure is the result of tensions over the sports rorts affair, but she has conceded to Sky News that she did raise concerns about political interference in the process to the Sports Australia board. Now, I have to point out she only did that after the Australian National Audit Office, Kieran, began looking into the affair, and that occurred after the opposition referred it following Georgina Downer doing that February announcement with the big sports check. But during the election campaign, she raised concerns with the Sports Australia board. Let's have a look at what Ms Palmer told me this morning, if we can. She said, "It's very difficult for me at this point to make any comment. Any matters of concern about the program were raised when it became apparent by the announcement by the Audit Office that there was to be an audit." And she says that's when it became apparent as to the extent of the problem. So we have a situation here, Kieran, where 2 months out from the federal election, the Sport Australia board's being advised by the CEO that there is a problem, it seems, with political interference in the process. Now, Ms Palmer was before Senate estimates on this issue in October. Let's listen to the exchange with the opposition frontbencher Don Farrell then about some of the grants.
You did put in a correction to your evidence at the last estimates. Yes. And just to quote from your correction, some projects from the pool of eligible applications that were preferred by the Minister were approved by her. You recall that correction?
Yes.
Is it correct to say that that refers to projects that the Minister chose to approve that, while they were eligible, had not been recommended by funding from Sports Australia?
As the delegate, the Minister approves the grants and was able to make decisions, the final decisions about the grants.
Yeah. But these were not recommendations made by Sports Australia. They were made by the Minister.
They may not have been.
They may not have been. Yeah.
Now, Ms Palmer's 3-year contract comes to an end on January 31, 2020. The statement from the Australian Sports Commission detailing her departure was put out 4 days after that estimate's evidence. She's a respected former head of Netball Australia. There are some in the sports community who feel she's been forced out for raising concerns over the scandal and perhaps even tension with the chair, John Wiley, of the Sports Commission over this. She steadfastly denies this, Kieran.
Andrew.
This is a serious matter. I'm taking it seriously. That's why we're acting on the recommendations of the Auditor General's report. In relation to the issues that you've raised in terms of the management of this issue, as you rightly say, I took that action last Friday week, I think it was, to refer that matter for the application of ministerial standards to the Secretary, which is important because interpretation of these standards needs to be done consistently over time. You've been around this place for a long time, Mark, and one of the things that you'll recall is that Ros Kelly and indeed Catherine King were both involved in programs that gave money to ineligible projects. The Auditor General found that did not occur. So I think there's quite a significant comparison there between those two. That's not to suggest that I'm not taking the broader observations and findings of the Auditor General seriously. Of course I am.
The Prime Minister on that issue at the National Press Club. And Andrew, the key words among his defence of the handling of it thus far in the process with Phil Gaetjens, the Secretary of his department, who is yet to hand back a report on Bridget McKenzie's handling of all this. But the key comment was that there were many more worthy projects in this area. I agree with that, the Prime Minister says. I will work with the Treasurer to see how we can better support even more projects in the future. So far from shying away from the program. He looks very much like he's going to extend it.
It's kind of a clever political fix, or is it? I mean, it is in the sense that those clubs who missed out won't be able to whinge if they get the money in the May budget, Kieran. But then we have a $100 million pork barrel scheme turn into what, 130, 150? So, I see what he's trying to do there. He's trying to address some of the complaints, but it just doesn't fix everything, that's for sure. And some pretty testy exchanges in there, again, sort of highlighted to me how he could have dealt with the Mackenzie matter and it would have been a better press club address for him.
Yeah, well, it was dominated by that, in certainly the questions. The other issue which dominated his speech were the fires, the fire crisis, which continues. I can tell you the sky in Canberra right now is red from that fire in the Namadgi National Park area, and it's quite ominous given you've got 42-degree days, I think, Friday and Saturday predicted, and winds changes as well. So things don't look great on that front, but he's talking about expanding the Commonwealth powers in this regard. He flagged that a few weeks ago. He went into a bit more detail in that speech. Let's have a look.
To date, though, the role of the Commonwealth in responding to natural disasters has been limited to responding to requests for assistance for state governments. They judge the time and the form of support needed and make that request. But I must say that the scale of the bushfires this season, not least their simultaneous reach across many borders, has demonstrated to me the limits of these arrangements.
So, Andrew, we know the criticism. You've been reporting on it for weeks now throughout January about the management of the fires, the fire crisis, which continues. What did you make of his commitments at the press club?
South Wales were blocking him from acting. If there are laws which he's flagging where he can declare a national state of emergency and just go in, we should call them the Shane Fitzsimmons laws, Kieran, because it was the RFS chief who advised Gladys Berejiklian that they didn't need the defence reservists at that time, and that's where we've got to this situation. Bizarrely, the biggest scene-setting thing from his first speech of the year is going to be dealing with that issue, dealing with that fight with New South Wales. So I've got no doubt he'll act. Obviously, the PM sees it as a serious problem, a serious gap there. But if the RFS chief had have said yes on that Saturday, we wouldn't even be having that discussion.
On the emissions front, he's talking a lot about hazard reduction. He concedes that the fire seasons are getting longer and hotter due to climate change. He's adamant, though, that they're on the right track with their emissions plan. I asked him about that, and particularly his argument that with 1.3% of emissions, Australia's doing its bit. But as I put it to him, worldwide, if you look at all of the similar nations with a footprint of 1.5% or thereabouts, you get to 40% of global emissions. And the question I put to him was in relation to leadership. Could Australia take a more of a leadership role in this regard? Have a look.
Meeting and beating our Kyoto targets, and that we're going to meet and beat our Paris targets. That's what the Australian accent is saying under our government. And I'll seek to amplify that every opportunity I get. There are plenty who want to silence that accent, many from our own country, for whatever purposes they're seeking to do that for. But I'll keep speaking it strongly and loudly that Australia, as I did at the United Nations last year, Australia is carrying its load and more.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's talking about the Australian accent when it comes to climate change. The Liberal Party accent is quite interesting too, isn't it, Andrew? Because we know many of his own colleagues want him to reposition a bit on it, don't they?
Well, he didn't, did he? He was so emphatic in answering your question there, and he clearly has the position of the Liberal right on this issue. And if any moderates had any doubt about that, they shouldn't now, and he has the position of the Nationals on this issue. And he's not for turning. It's interesting. I mean, I sort of don't know why he said at the start of the month after the bushfires, our climate policy is always evolving. I guess he means in terms of technology, but it's not evolving in terms of the target. It's not evolving in terms of the use of the carryover credit. And the carryover credit means the target's much less than it otherwise could be. But he ain't shifting. At least we're very firm in that knowledge now, Kieran.
Andrew, thanks.